we know from the New Testament, from the Bible, and we know from many, many, many kinds of evidence that for many centuries there were women deacons who served the church. And the Syriac tradition, this was very important. There were many ways. So I think it's important to think what was this ministry in the early centuries. So women deacons were important, deaconesses, because they provided a ministry to women. In the early church, many of the converts, Christians were converting from other religions to Christianity. And so the converts needed to be taught. And then many of the baptisms were baptisms of adults. And, a very important part of Christian baptism is the anointing. And then do you dip your babies into a font of water? So you imagine this with adults. So you need to be appropriately modest. The priest, you need to, protect everybody's dignity. So you needed deaconesses to assist with the baptism of the women, so that it was very respectfully done. And then the male deacons would assist with the baptisms of the men. But the women deacons, the deaconesses, had other important ministries they did for the bishops. They visited sick women at home. Sometimes, and it says in Syriac canon law, that women deacons could carry the reserved sacrament to the sick women or sick children if they were not able to come to church to receive the Eucharist, the Corbona. The women deacons could go and visit them. Of course, they had the task of cleaning the altar and cleaning the church. But they also had the very important job, I think that this is unique to Syriac, that the deaconesses were the choir directors for the women's choirs that began with St. Ephrem in the 4th century. And we have many attestations also in Syriac canon law and beautiful descriptions. St. Jacob of Sarug, he says, open your ears and hear the beautiful singing of the women. Our churches resound with the beautiful voices of the women's choirs, filling your ears with truth and with peace. Well, the deaconesses were the choir directors, and they supervised the choirs and they trained the women's choirs so that when they sang in liturgy, they sang beautifully and they sang well, and they sang the hymns of St. Ephrem and others. So the women deacons had many, many jobs in the service of the church. And then we don't really know, but maybe after about 1,000 years, it begins to disappear. So we don't live in the 4th century or the 6th century. Now we live in the 21st century. And now one would need to ask, what could such a ministry offer now? That women deacons were deaconesses in the ancient church. They were ordained, but it was not a step to the priesthood. There was no, it didn't, the priesthood was a different ministry. The bishop was a different ministry. The deaconess was a different ministry. The deacons, because the deacons were very important also. So it's important that we not think of this as some kind of rival. It wasn't a rival. It was another form of ministry that was very valuable. And when we think now, even in the 21st century, we think of the many times, it's a very important topic in our society, at least in North America, but not only, about problems of that women sometimes encounter with violence or sexual harassment that can make it difficult sometimes for them to feel, or even take a happier instance. Sometimes it's easier for a woman to talk to another woman, and if that could be acknowledged in a form of ministry, whether it's a chaplain or woman deacon, that's an important ministry that the church could provide. That perhaps for some women, it would be more comfortable if they could talk with another woman, and perhaps even sometimes women deacons or deaconesses could hear confession, but then a priest would provide absolution. So again, not to compete with the priest. It's a different set of jobs. And in the places now where there's talk about revitalizing the diaconate, it's clear that we need also to revitalize the work of male deacons. Again, to visiting the sick as a ministry to men, practical service in the community that the priest very often, I don't know, there's one of you, you can't do every single job. You can't, and the parish would love you to do every single job, but there's only one of you. But with an active diaconate, perhaps the church would be more able to offer more kinds of ministry in the local communities than the priest can do by himself. So I think if people talk now about the diaconate, they need to think about what kinds of work are meaningful now in our 21st century culture. And I think there's probably an important way of talking about how the gifts of women could be recognized in forms of ministry for the church that are not competing, but are offering additional ministry. Is that making sense?
That makes sense. It's not to conflict, but to complement.
Yes.
And that has to be relevant, in the context. That's what I'm hearing from you. So
yes.
The role has to be contextual. It's not that we are digging back something which is outdated, but it has to be relevant to the present day. At the same time, complementing the ministry. It's Christ's ministry rather than a priest ministry,
Exactly. Yes.